My name is Dr. Michelle Lim, and I'm the director of the Social Health and Wellbeing Laboratory at Swinburne University of Technology. I'm also the scientific chair of the Australian Coalition to End Loneliness, and today I'll be talking about loneliness. So, specifically, I want to talk a little bit about how loneliness affects our well-being and how we should be connecting with others at the workplace. The first thing we need to do, though, is to really define what loneliness is, because that term can be confusing and sometimes it can be used to refer or be confused with terms like isolation or physical isolation. But when we say the word loneliness, what we're referring to is this subjective feeling of social isolation. So, this perceived sense that you are alone, even though you are not, you are surrounded by other people. So, you can be in a group and still feel lonely. You can be included, but you never feel like you belonged. Loneliness is distressing. It's a feeling of discomfort. And it comes up when you feel your social relationships are actually not quite adequate or not quite what they should be. Specifically, that they're not enough or they are not meeting your expectations. So, we're not talking about physical isolation, nor are we talking about solitude. Solitude is uh, where people yearn to be by themselves. We're talking about a feeling that comes up that is unwanted and distressing. So, loneliness can have different meanings for different cultures, even within the Asian culture. So, being in a collective culture, per se, as opposed to more individualistic cultures like in Australia, being in a collective culture can actually help a little bit. It can facilitate opportunities for connection, uh, feelings of membership, but also being a little bit different or being a bit more unique may also predispose one to feel isolated from the wider group. So, what we need to think about is what loneliness means for you in your culture, and not just in your society, but also within your workspace. What does that mean? And within your own family. They all might mean something different to different people. With the research within the loneliness and collective culture, it's very much under examined at the moment. So we'll be really focusing on what loneliness means in, I guess, the concept as to which the science is referring to right now, which is you can be with other people but never feel like you're in tune with other people. Maybe people misunderstand you. You feel you lack companionship. Um, some people feel lonely in their intimate relationship, so you can be married but still feel alone. Or some people are not married and feel extremely alone. So you can actually yearn for that intimate connection, but also have many friends. So they don't really always, addressing loneliness doesn't always cater to all aspects of your life. It can be very specific. One thing that's really important to know is about how loneliness affects our well being. So there's a lot of negative, I guess, relationships between the two. So high levels of loneliness often predicts poor well-being, as we would expect. But what we don't actually anticipate is that loneliness is actually bad for your health. In fact, it's quite stressful on your physical body. So if we think about how we are are when we are by ourselves and as opposed to with other people, we actually spend more resources scanning our environment, making sure that we're watching or taking care of ourselves. But if we're with someone else or we know that someone else has our back, we are not as likely to put the same amount of resources in there. So what happens is that over time, feeling alone, so not just being physically alone, but feeling alone might mean that we are actually putting more stress on our bodies. So think about it. If you're walking down a dark alley, If you're by yourself, you're more likely to look behind, you're more likely to scan your environment, you're more likely to make plans to ensure that you actually leave work before it gets dark. So you actually think about those processes or steps ahead. But if you are walking down a dark alley with a trusted friend or a colleague coming back from work, you're less likely to make the effort to ensure that you're going to get home safely. So the premise is that feeling alone or even being alone can actually make us work harder and actually then puts stress on our system. The other thing is that loneliness is a social stress, and that when we perceive this social stress, we process this threat in our heads, and it does go into our bodies and expresses itself in our bodies. So, loneliness has been kind of related to poorer cardiovascular health, poorer immunity, poorer inflammatory responses. And a wide variety of things, so including things like increasing your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So, what we really do know now, and we have good evidence to say that loneliness is bad for health. And in fact, loneliness can actually increase our, I guess, the chances of dying earlier by 26%. So that's actually quite worrying. And unfortunately, when we feel lonely, the issue that we have in our society is that the word loneliness is a negative connotation. It denotes some sort of fragility or vulnerability, and people don't want to acknowledge that they're lonely, or they kind of equate it to being a loser, oh, I'm so needy, I need more. Actually, loneliness is actually a really innate system that's built in us, very similar to feeling hungry or feeling thirsty. The way you need to kind of think about loneliness is that we're not immune to it. We will all feel lonely at some point, and we should respond to it like a normal signal. So humans, we have through evolution, we have survived as a species based on large social groups. Now, when we're hungry, we know we should be eating, and when we're thirsty, we know we should get a drink. But actually, when you're lonely, actually, it's your signal to connect with other people. So again, it doesn't matter where you would like to connect, but what I really would recommend is looking at all opportunities to connect. And if you are at work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, it's a lot of time to be at work and without actually feeling like you can connect with other people. So, what the workplace is actually a great opportunity for us to find those meaningful connections and actually create a positive workspace where we are looking forward to actually seeing our colleagues at work. So, one thing that we need to kind of think about is how do we make connecting with people at work more engaging? The workplace are, I guess, I guess a hotbed of a platform where different people with different personalities have come together and are expected to collaborate and work hard and trust each other. But we do know in reality, those things are really hard to do. So, for employees, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about 10 points in which you think, which I would recommend that you do to connect with other people. So, knowing that not everyone does get along and knowing that it's not a one size fits all, I think what's really important is to identify the people that you think you can relate to. Now, they don't have to be your age. In fact, sometimes the best relationships are those that are really unlikely, like intergenerational friendships. They're good for the younger person and an older person. So it could be a mentoring relationship. An older person feels valuable in terms of imparting wisdom and knowledge, and a younger person feels like they're cared for or shepherded. So it's actually a really attractive kind of pairing if you think about it. And we have to be flexible in terms of who we can relate to. So if there are colleagues that you find that you just can't relate to, it's okay to move to other people or other departments. It really doesn't matter. Um, I think that finding your crowd can take a while, but if you can't find your crowd at work, it doesn't stop you from actually looking outside work as well, because we do need that flexibility both in our work life and outside. So that's your first point. The second point is finding time. Now, we've got to be really flexible with our time. So if it's a minute chat in the tea room or walking to the office after lunch, that is fine. You don't need hours and hours and hours to connect with people deeply. And it doesn't actually have to be done in one go, and probably it's not wise for it to be done in one go. So consistency is probably a better thing to think about. Number three, make the effort. Now, good relationships do need a lot of time and investment, but they're absolutely worth it. And most people feel like they have to do a lot. But in fact, again, incremental effort, caring and sharing in little ways, they don't have to cost a lot, but they actually go a long way. Number four, so showing care for others and just keeping in mind is a little bit of a balancing act. So I know this is a bit of a no-brainer, but don't talk just about yourself, and also ask about other people, and ask sincerely, because people will know if you don't ask those things sincerely. People who are only interested in themselves, they end up with friendships that are really unbalanced and unhealthy, and they often become really short-term friendships, and those friendships are very much severed. Okay, so it's very unbalanced, and usually the two parties are not very happy. So you do need to have this balancing act by showing care for others and not just talking about yourself. um, there are people who are more givers and there are people who are more takers, but that's okay as long as both parties are happy, and it works. Now, the next point is don't be afraid of small talk. And I know it sounds weird because most people actually come to me and say, I don't like uh, talking about the weather, or don't like talking about the game, I don't like talking about all this superficial stuff. When are we going to get into the more meaningful things? Actually, small talk actually serves a purpose. They may seem superficial, but actually they signal your willingness to engage with the other person. And then small talk gets into more meaningful conversations as you proceed. So that's really important. And you don't have to master or come across as really smart or anything, or kind of eloquent in small talk. Really, it's just an opener if you kind of view it that way. Number six, accept the dynamic relationships or your friends in the workplace. Now, you may be a friend for a reason, which is kind of in the workplace, and both of you have bonded over overcoming different tasks. But remember, there is a saying, friends for reasons, friends for seasons, and friends for life. We don't know whether the connections that you have are long term, but that's actually okay. So, even outside the workplace, we would expect that your friendships will wax and wane over time. You get closer, you get further apart, depending on your life events and depending on what happens or your stage of life that you're in. Imagine if you're a young mother, for example, you will have a lot less time to invest and to take care of your friends because you're trying to take care of a little one. Or if you're caring for a parent, those things are stressful. So it's really important to kind of accept that, friendships do change, or relationships are meant to actually have almost this dynamic, wavering connection rather than it having to stay the same all the time. Number seven, now favor face to face interactions if you can. And I know that we already communicate very heavily through technology, but if you don't know a colleague well enough, especially when you haven't quite met them face to face, it doesn't hurt to actually pop by their office to meet them face to face. And sometimes it can be a little bit problematic when some of the things that we speak about may not be translated well over email, text, or chat. So you need to kind of think about how we can get to know the person face to face first, and then using technology to facilitate that relationship rather than just focusing on developing an online solely digital a relationship through only digital means. Number 8, focus on positive interactions. Now, this is again, um, I'm not saying that you can't share your negative events or failures in life, but sharing positive things or having a laugh is really important. Um, Take note about the way you respond when someone tells you good news. Do you show that you're happy for them in a very sincere way, an obvious way? Or do you just nod and not say much? Or do you just completely ignore it? Or do you say something unhelpful or sarcastic? Now, how you respond to others can really influence your relationship with them. So we know that the only response that will bring people closer together are is the response where you would respond sincerely, enthusiastic. You build on their good news. Those are the kinds of responses that people gravitate to. So just acknowledging someone's success with a nod or oh great job, that is not enough. You've got to build on their success. Number 9, focus on giving support that's respectful and appropriate. Now, this is really tricky because you want to ensure that your support is really well received or wanted in the first place. So you need to give appropriate levels of support and be very careful about not going to this pseudo therapy mode if your colleague actually wants more social support for problematic mental health issues. You've got to kind of be very careful about staying within those boundaries. Now, I'm going to now also focus on points for employers. Now, you need to think about how to allow space for employees and teams to work together. Now, I don't actually mean just your yearly team building days. That is insufficient. We're talking about something on a more regular basis. Can you celebrate successes and challenges? Can you encourage people to kind of connect more formally or informally? It doesn't really matter. It's more about consistency and making it more regular. And think about the urban space in your office. Is there a place where people can gather to actually have a chat? And you might think that chatting at the tea room is a waste of time, but in fact, building those relationships can actually help with well-being and positivity as well as build relationships. So seeing your colleagues in a completely different light and not just work related is actually really important for some people. Now, employees also need positive feedback. So do you notice how often you give negative feedback? Like, how does that actually then influence the way people see you or trust you or connect with you? Remember that you're more likely to make an employee feel alienated if you're really sparse on your positive feedback. So notice the efforts, and your positive feedback can actually go a long way in building that trust. And an employee that trusts you will actually work harder for you. Okay, so number 4, it's strong leadership. So we need to facilitate open communication and connections between leaders and employees to really achieve some common goals. But we need to think about how we can increase this trust, the collaboration, the positivity, so that each person feels valued. And when I say strong leadership, it's common sense, for example, not to speak poorly of other employees in front of their colleagues. Do not contribute to any kind of relationship dynamics in the workplace that's unhelpful. You want to steer the conversation to what people can do rather than what they can't do. And you got to kind of do that in an empathetic way. And this is particularly hard if you yourself is actually struggling with that particular individual. So I'll explain why this is really bad. Your unhelpful comments for one person can actually make them feel excluded and lonely. Now, that negativity can be passed on to other team members who works with that person, and the person that's being excluded can really feel this exclusion and then become less cooperative with other people in an attempt to kind of protect themselves from rejection. So it becomes this vicious cycle. So you don't really want to create any cliques or contribute to any office dynamics or workplace relationships in that way. It's not going to serve you well. Now, strong leaders are also wise. What is really important is that they encourage their employees to have healthy work life balance. So, we know that people who are actively engaged in life, who are connected with people in general, who are um, more likely to be, there are more people who are connected, are more likely to report higher well-being. They will be in better physical and mental state. They're going to take less sick leave. They're also going to cope better with life transitions. Family relationships and friendships outside work should be prioritized for both your employees and yourself. And those with personal issues should also be assisted in small ways. So remember that there are people at the workplace that have to cope with adversity outside work, like caring for someone. So if you show care beyond the workplace, your employee will more likely return the same sentiments about caring for you in the workplace. And it really is a good role model or sets the scene for them. So that's all I have in terms of how we can connect with other people at the workplace. One thing that's really important to understand is that this is, we all know how to do this in some level, but often we don't. And time and effort is required. And also, it's really important for us to address um, not just working with each other, but really making that meaningful connection. So I hope that this has been useful and facilitate some discussion for many of you. And I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say to each other. Thank you.